Hi, so today I wanted to do my top five role playing games of all time. Quick disclaimer obviously, these are games that I like. And Second disclaimer, these are games I like rules as written. So uh, I would get all these games to the table and not change a thing and have a great time. And that's why some things didn't make it. So number five is Dark Heresy Second Edition. Uh, so there's three reasons that I think it's one of my favorite games. I've only ever been a player, not a GM in it, uh, but uh, even still, the experience was so fun and rewarding that I I had to put it on this list. So the reasons are it's incredibly tactical. You're constantly having to worry about positioning. You like worried about being flanked. You're whether or not you're in cover. You have to make sure that people aren't gonna come charge you. The tension is always high because it's a pretty like deadly game, and it it makes combat feel very visceral, and it's the closest thing I've ever played to like XCOM, the tabletop RPG, because that's kind of how it ended up uh, turning out, as in the tactics, not necessarily the setting. Um, and secondly, the critical hit tables. So the game has a whole bunch of different critical hit tables. So if you get hit by something, then you'll get different like wounds based on what you got hit with. So one of my characters got hit with a blunt object, and it like caved in his chest and injured his heart. And luckily, one of the other players stabilized him, and he had to get his whole chest and heart replaced by machine parts. But luckily, he was a tech priest, so he was pretty fine with that. Um, and it was just it made combat feel very impactful, and uh, increased the stakes a lot, even without me dying in that situation. Uh, Third was the mental conditions. So I really liked the fact that the game kind of imposed role playing, like a role playing element onto my character that I hadn't necessarily wanted him to have from the beginning. So I was in the presence of a Nurgle demon, and I kept vomiting, and the psychic bombardment altered my brain in order to make so much that I became super paranoid, and it fundamentally changed how I was playing my character, and I was pretty like set on who he was, and it kind of altered him in a way that I felt was very interesting, and it was a very rewarding role playing experience because it changed, it altered the character fundamentally, and it was really fun to have that forced role play put on me. Um, I know games like Pendragon do that too, that have elements that kind of where your character kind of takes over. Uh, but yeah, I really liked it in Dark Heresy, and it's a game I would highly recommend as for those reasons. Number four is Dread. So Dread is a game centered around the Jenga tower. And essentially, what it is all the players, the GM will call for them to take out blocks and during tense moments, and if the tower falls, then a player dies. Well, the character, um, and it it's a really great game at simulating tension and adding a physical element to the game that feels very like it's adding a lot, and it it's my favorite game to introduce new players as a game master, as someone who's played a lot of games. I wouldn't necessarily recommend this for a new game master, but the it it allows you to take a bunch of people who know what Jenga is. They've played Jenga before, and add some role playing on top of it and make it more communal. And honestly, it succeeds. And I played with 11 to 12 players with this game. I don't recommend that, but all of them thoroughly enjoyed the experience, and it I think it just goes to show that it's a great new player kind of induction game, and it's a one-shot game. But also, I've used the Jenga Tower as a peripheral mechanic in my games. So this might be you're in a cult town and you're starting to ask around about the cult, but you ask a cultist. I would ask you to take a block out of the Jenga Tower, and then the player, even with my description, kind of gets the feeling of nonverbal cues, right? Like they know that what they just said was impactful and added tension to the situation, and they feel that. So I really like it also to do that. But so that's something I actually take out of that game and sometimes put it in if I'm looking to do something like that. So number 3 is Dungeon World. So Dungeon World is the game I usually recommend to new game masters. And that's largely because it hits all the fantasy tropes. It teaches the GM structure of play in a way that's very fast-paced, interesting, and I feel like it helps bring the game to life just on its own. Like the driving mechanics in the game are really good at that. Personally, I don't love moves, so that's why you won't see any Powered by the Apocalypse games on this list. But that's mostly because I don't necessarily like mechanics that enforce genre. But if others do, I think that's perfectly reasonable. It's just personal preference. The things I take from Dungeon World and my other games, though, I really liked bonds. It was one of the first times I've ever come across bonds, and essentially what it is it's the relationships between the player characters. And I thought it did a really good job of establishing a party dynamic from the get-go. And it was really great in play, and I've used it in all my games. Yeah, and another thing I really like about it is it's very easy to run. All the mechanics are player facing, so as a GM you're not rolling, and that allows you to focus on the NPCs and the situations rather than worrying about mechanics while you're trying to GM. And I think that's also why I think it's really good for a new GM, because you're just worried about the GM moves, and that's all you have to worry about. Yeah, I think that's all I have to say about that. So my next game is Stars Without Number, and the first edition behind it. So Stars Without Number is mechanically a mixture a mixture of Traveler and Dungeons and Dragons. But the core resolution mechanics are not necessarily what I think is best about the game. So what I think is best is, but they're perfectly serviceable, and I've enjoyed my games with them. The GM tags. So essentially, there's a section about tags are essentially plot hooks for the GM that kind of help you with your prep. So it might be like, oh, alien invasion. So these are common tropes with alien invasions in the form of friends, enemies, things, and like locations. And it really helps you get into the mindset of prepping and helps kind of inspire you a lot. And honestly, it's probably my favorite supplement for any game. Like I have Stars Without Number, I have Worlds Without Number, and I have Silent Legions. So those are like my fantasy, my science fiction, and my modern game, right? So I have all those tools, and I use them for all my games, no matter what genre, because I just buy whatever Kevin Crawford puts out, and I use them in my games. So that's why it's number 2. I will say I prefer the skill system in the first edition. I think it was done a bit better in terms of I prefer the categorization and I like the skill packages. But overall, second edition is a vast improvement. It has like ascending armor class, which is good and modern. Yeah, and also the faction turn is often talked about, and I've had great experiences with the faction turn. So essentially, what it is a solo fun kind of thing that the GM does on their own, and they kind of play out this little mini game with all the factions, and they're like moving their units around, and I had this one experience where I was prepping. These psychic cannibals moved to a planet that I wasn't expecting the players to go to, but they ended up randomly going there. And they basically had to deal with this psychic cannibal insurgency. And it was just a great experience because it surprised me as the GM while I was running it. And that is, to me, no small feat because it's always fun to get little surprises here and there. And as a GM, it doesn't really happen that often with games. So I think that's one of the things that it does the best at. But yeah, so that's one of my favorite games. My last game is Barbarians of Lemuria, and my less recommended Everywhen, which is the generic version. So Barbarians of Lemuria is a game I would say has no fat. Like it's all meat, and that's I think why it's one of my favorite games, or my favorite game actually. So it's a 2d6 mechanic. You just add your attribute and your career's pretty basic. It has hit point equivalent. They're low, so the game is still tense, and the combats are short. But the characters are still very heroic. Also, another thing I really love about it is the magic system. So the magic system is super like abstract, and you can do a lot of different things with it. It's not only like it's flexible, it's powerful, it feels like magic. And also the religion system, or the like priest career is it kind of acts as if your god is a very distant god, and it kind of brings in that element. It's like, oh, is your god really real, or are you just like good at like blessing people and making people feel impacted by what you're doing? So the issue I have with it is it doesn't have great progression. People say, oh, just change the dice system to kind of accommodate, but obviously this is at rules as written, so it's still my favorite game. But I wouldn't, as rules is written, I wouldn't run it for very long because the progression doesn't really help with that. So yeah, that's my list.